ARGH, not another podcast about book publishing, hosted by William May, in which the author finds himself embroiled in a podcast about book publishing.
Hello, I'm Maggie Dimitrova, co-producer and editor for ARGH, not another podcast about book publishing. I'm very excited to welcome you to our first official episode, At Home with Words, Finding Love and Support in the Creative Life. Today's episode features an intimate chat between William and his fiancé, former newspaper editor Melissa Myers. I hope you enjoy this emotional conversation about creativity and partnership. Welcome to the podcast. Let's discover the magic of words together.
Hello. This is Denise again with William May's podcast, ARGH. Not another podcast about book publishing. I'm sitting here with William May and his fiancée, Melissa Myers. And I thought it'd be interesting if you had a chance to hear a little bit about what it's like to live with a writer. So Melissa's going to be talking with William, and William talking with Melissa. And I'm going to ask Melissa, the first question would be, what is it like living with a writer?
I would say it's not easy. There are times where I wonder what's happening. There's a mystery. There's a lot of alone time. And when I think nothing's going on, and then all of a sudden there'll be a novel finished. And I'm kind of in wonder about how all it happened. I'm lucky. Not everybody gets to live with a writer. It's the other end of the process that's my weakest part of the writing process. I'm much better at coming in and telling somebody what's right and wrong, or what I like or what I didn't like, or what works and doesn't work. But I've also learned not to share some of my opinions with William, partly because my editing experience just comes from a different world where I'm looking for precise language, concise, commas, set periods, which he doesn't really like.
Quick question. True. Tell us about what you were doing when you said when you used to edit.
I worked in the dying industry of newspapers for a little over 20 years. It was something I thought I would do all my life, and it didn't work out. Technology changed everything. So I'm all about the facts, and that's the least of which I think is important to William's writing. It's about emotion and heart and soul.
So William, what's it like for you to live with a non-writer?
Well, I mean, I think I have to admit, first of all, that I think in some ways it's very difficult even for a writer to live with a writer. I think, that's not an untruth. I mean, first of all, even when I talk to other writer friends of mine, they have similar kinds of needs in terms of like literally, as Melissa said, there's times when I will be sitting, staring, seeming to be doing absolutely nothing for hours at a time, because in all outward appearance, that's what's happening. And it's like, why aren't you working on this or that or whatever? And I think two people who do that together could drive each other quite insane. I think you sort of need someone who's more practical and more aware of the reality of things. And Melissa's certainly more, oriented towards, it's totally fine. For me, I will sit and be like, oh, well, I want to go write, so I'm not going to worry about the fact that there's a pile of dishes in the sink or laundry to be done or this, that, and the other thing. And I will just leave it alone and be like, I'm focused on my writing. Everything else can go to hell.
So being as Melissa was an editor, do you show Melissa your work before you let others see it? So before it's posted on social media? Or is she seeing it at the same time everybody else is?
Okay, I think it depends on different things. I like to write a lot. I write, a number of poems every day. I write other stuff on a very regular basis. Some of the things I write are longer and, they take a long time. I have a nonfiction piece that I'm working on that's well over 50,000 words at this point, and I've been working on it for probably more than a year and a half. And I'm not sure when it's going to be done, to be honest. But anyway, so I have big projects like that. I have smaller projects. I show Melissa my work. I don't have a problem with her looking at it at any stage, usually, unless it's something. There's times when with any work, it's in a stage where I don't show it to anybody. But that's more just like it's just not there. It's just very personal and not ready to be. I'm not confident about it yet. And sometimes it's just a matter of letting it sit for a day, and then you feel confident enough. And sometimes it's continuing to work. But Melissa, I think first of all, we learned early on, as Melissa said, that her editorial bent is aimed in a very different direction than my work. And she has, I'm a poet. I'm not trying to have my poem edited to be a newspaper column. And I think it's hard for Melissa, having been trained in that, to necessarily switch gears after so long of just doing one thing in her editing. So I think, what do you think, Melissa?
Well, I don't normally read your work until you ask me to. I also, sometimes I don't read the blog, and I wonder if I should, but I kind of want to give you the space to have it public but private from me, so that you can be fully present and honest if you decide to bitch about something I did. It's funny, there is a crossover between traditional news media and poetry in a way that's the most poetic part of some journalistic work is the headlines, especially the old print headlines where it was really an economy of words and spaces and letters, and some of the best writers were the tabloid writers, and they really had a sense of poetry about them. It was more like Runyon-esque kind of poetry.
Right.
There was an argument in the newsroom about whether stable hand should be one word or two, and it sort of came down to, well, which is more poetic? And I think I decided to keep it one word, but somebody may have changed it and made it two.
It's funny to me, stable hand as one word makes more sense, because stable hand as two words sounds like you're saying someone has a hand that is stable.
Yes.
Oh, you mean stable hand like a horse?
Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting. I would say 2 words.
Yeah.
Interesting. So let me ask another question of you, Melissa. If you were to have your druthers, anything in the world for William, what do you wish for him over the next year? Let's say a year from right now.
Oh God, I don't know if I want to sit here and listen to this.
Yeah, you do.
It's a little spooky.
It's fascinating.
I want success, recognition. I really want people to appreciate what he does, because he spends so much time and energy, and he lives his writing. And he has such an admirable writing practice that would be the envy of so many others. He doesn't take a day off, ever. And whatever fate or circumstance has brought us to this point, I would like to see people appreciate William's work in a wider audience.
More masses. Do you think it's spreading? Do you see a growth from a year ago?
Yes.
From last year, this time?
Definitely. Just the interaction he gets from people on social media and, his newsletter and stuff like that. And people respond who I thought would never be interested in poetry, which I like. I think poetry continues to surprise people.
I think it's really interesting. I'd sort of like to bring up, Melissa's own journey with poetry and her experiences. Because I think for Melissa, I think poetry was something that you didn't think a lot about or really have a lot of experience with until we were together, and it sort of changed your perspective on it and also your experience of it. And I think what really did it was when we went to poetry readings together. And I'm wondering if you'd want to talk about how you thought about poetry and how you think about poetry now, and sort of the experience of being around poets, I guess.
It's a lot of fun being around poets, especially when they're cutting loose. I don't know if, in their work mode, they're probably different, but I find they're incredibly honest about their lives and their experiences.
Are you okay?
Yeah.
What's happening for you right now?
I mean, I've been tremendously moved by some of the poets that William's encountered. And it's an admirable thing. It's, in a way, I'm envious that they can put their words and feelings out to the world with such honesty and
vulnerability.
Yeah.
I'm going to let you catch your breath for a minute, because I'm going to ask another question first to William and then come back to you. Thanks for sharing those emotions with us. So William, if someone were to ask you, what's the difference between a writer and a poet?
I mean, I think in some ways that's like the difference between an addict and a junkie. You know what I mean? Like, I think that really it's
Explain it.
I mean, I guess it's sort of drug of choice. In a certain way. I think of myself as a poet because I think primarily because that's where my first love is with poetry. I am a writer in general as well, I guess, if we're going to be literal about it. But I think that, first of all, not all writers write poetry, obviously. So, I mean, but I think that I think poetry, really what you're asking me at a certain point is what is the difference between poetry and other forms of writing?
Correct.
And that's a very complicated and difficult question to answer. I think some of the answers I've received have been really, very much about, poetry is written language, but it's sculpted to feel like it came from within a moment. It's something that someone might have said in a heightened state of emotion. I think that really, to me, poetry is language doing what language was not intended or capable of doing.
Well, that's interesting.
I mean, to me, that's sort of what poetry is about using language to do things that are normally outside of the capabilities of language.
Is it more spontaneous?
I wouldn't say that. I mean, it should feel more spontaneous, but that's an illusion. That has to be created. I mean, I can point to poems that if you read them, you'd be like, oh my God, that feels like something that someone dashed off in 5 minutes, and show you 20 pages of notes over 10 years that the person spent honing that poem into exactly what it is.
That's interesting, because I think a lot of times people think, oh, poetry, it's a much easier form of writing. So I'm glad we're getting into this.
That's the illusion.
Yeah,
that's what it's supposed to look like. I mean, you take,
why?
Because poetry should not appear to have artifice. It shouldn't appear fake. It should be real.
Raw.
Well, not just raw, but real. It should be authentic, is what I mean. I think it's getting back towards what Melissa was talking about with what poets, being around poets, that feeling of honesty, of authenticness. I think that a lot of poetry is about being able to present, even if, okay, there's no way to actually present it, but to give the experience to the reader or the audience of the poem, that experience of that authenticness. And that in a real way, not even though it takes illusion sometimes and deception and technique and all this stuff to make it appear that way, the experience for the reader should not reflect that.
And would you say words are, with a poem, you don't need words that are superfluous? In other words, someone might write, a novelist might write, the blue mist across the pond, blah, 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 blah. But a poet might say,
yes, there's an economy.
The pond sat there with a tree, like an economy. Exactly.
Yeah, there's an economy of language. If you talk to poets, a lot of poets will say to you, oh, don't use adverbs, don't use, I use adverbs on occasion. I think most poets will cop to that happening. They may get edited out much of the time, really. But, the thing is, poetry is about language in many ways. It's about the experience of language. It's about the feeling, the texture of language, the sound, the music, the elements of the rhythm, the meter, the texture, and all of those things are stronger when it's condensed. Right. Just like if you were to take, a soup and add a gallon of water to it, it would have all the same flavors, but they wouldn't be as
diluted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in the same way, if you were to take all the words that a poet uses in a poem and add another 50 to every 20, all of a sudden those words don't have the same meaning, even if the same
less impact.
It changes.
So Melissa, I'm going to ask you to answer the same question: the difference between a writer and a poet in your mind.
A poet is much more intentional. Again, with headlines, every space and letter and word and punctuation point matters.
Oh, yeah. I once, I was in a class with a fairly famous poet named Carolyn Kaiser was visiting us, and she sat there talking about how she once had 2 hours of conversation with another poet about a single piece of punctuation. Literally
hours.
Whether or not, literal hours deciding, should this be punctuated this way or should it be punctuated that way? And going back and forth and debating the merits of each one. And no one in the class was like, oh, this is ridiculous. We were all like, oh, we get it. This is totally normal.
You enjoyed it, but the thing
is... Well, it's not, no, you don't necessarily enjoy it, but you do it because
you're there.
It's right. It's what's required.
So I think we're good. I think overall we've had an interesting discussion. Anything that either of you want to ask each other or add to the conversation?
I just want to say, it really means a lot to me, the things Melissa was saying about my practice and how much, because day to day, I do my work and that's how it is. It's not something I think about. And I know that Melissa, recognizes it as important to me and that she supports me and she always tells me how, she admires my discipline and stuff.
That's awesome.
But it always really means a lot to me to hear her, talk about it and how...
To share it.
It really does. It makes me feel a lot of good feelings, I guess.
I think it's interesting because you are a couple, right?
Right.
And what I'm feeling from this conversation...
Couple of what nobody will say.
Yeah, is that you each have mutual respect for one another. And it's difficult to be with a creative person at times, and that you respect that person. That's what I'm hearing. And I think that's really important for all couples, but particularly when you're involved with someone who's creative and a writer and who can, like you said, disappear for hours and you're wondering what he's doing. He's not mending his socks. That's for sure.
Yep.
Okay, well, thanks guys for being here and being so open and expressive. We'll see you next time, or you'll hear us next time.
This is William May saying goodbye. If you enjoyed the episode, please share it with your friends. If not, please share it with your enemies.
ARGH, Not Another Podcast About Book Publishing, is produced by Denise Marsa, Maggie Dimitrova, and William May. Please visit williammaywrites.com for social media links, recited poems, and more.